Hello, Pham-Satrappe here. Thank you so much for joining me. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the criteria that we use when we are picking a tenant and vetting out a tenant for a rental that we have. And then also share with you a couple of stories of when we caught tenants in a lie, basically via the application. So there are a number of different factors that we look at, but three of the main criteria that we look at are a tenant's income worthiness, meaning do they make enough money that it's an affordable rental for them. So the number that we use is we want to make sure that somebody makes at least 3 times the rent amount in their income. So let's say if I'm renting a house for $1,000, then I prefer for them to make at least $3,000 per month, so that way they can still afford to pay for groceries, basic utilities and lifestyle necessities and things like that. And obviously, because they're making an income, they're actively employed. Second thing we look at is credit worthiness. We're typically looking at a credit score at upwards of 600 or more. Some people will go as low as 550. Some people will increase that to 620 or 650. The way that I look at it is most people are renting because they can't, number one, they either can't afford to pay for to buy a house, and or because they've got bruised or new or dinged credit that they can't get the loan at a decent enough rate to be able to purchase a house. So 600 is kind of like that happy medium for me, where it's like they're not super irresponsible, or maybe they've had a mistake or two but they're working on getting it better. And then the third thing that we look at is we want for them to have a positive landlord history, meaning when we call the landlords to chat with them about this tenant, do they have good things to say? Would they rent to this person again, or can they not wait to get this person out of their property and therefore our problem, right? So there's a thing called Foisted. There was an episode, I think it was like Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I don't watch that show, but I think there was an episode where it's like the person purposely gave a bad review or perfectly gave a fake good review so that he could get rid of his assistant. And he was just like, why did you tell me about this? Anyway, I'm kind of revealing one of my stories. So actually, I'll go ahead and start with that. So we're in the process of vetting out tenants for a rental property that we have vacant right now because we just finished rehabbing it. And we're in the process. We had a seemingly qualified applicant. It was a young man, he's 22, and his mother, who was going to be co-signing with him. We verified the employment, we verified the credit check, and we're going through all of the different paperwork. And he was saying that he was anxious to move out of his childhood home and move out on his own. So we're like, okay, that's cool. Mom's helping him co-sign, which was a little bit off, which was a little bit weird because the son actually had a decent credit score. But his income wasn't quite there, which we would have wanted for the co-signing. So that part checks out. But as we're going through and doing our due diligence, I've got like a checklist of things that we look at. I noticed on his pay stub, the address that's listed on his pay stub was different than the address that was on the application. So I'm comparing the two. I do something called skip trace, where I'm like doing a reverse lookup to see, okay, who owns this property? So the property that he had listed on his application was indeed his parents' house, and I verified the name and the address and everything like that. I have a software that I use, but you could easily go to like the tax records to see who owns the house, right? But then I also looked up the address for the address that was listed on his pay stub, and it was showing us a non-owner occupied property, which indicates to me that it's a rental. So we did a skip trace. We looked up that owner's contact information, reached out to him, and he did verify that, Joe Schmo has lived there since for the last 2 years. He's paid rent late a couple of times, but he keeps up the place, etc. But basically, he verified that Joe Schmo, for purposes of my example, did live there. So it begs the question of, well, why did Joe Schmo leave that landlord reference out if the landlord was indeed going to give a decent review, right? So it's a lie of omission, and therefore I declined the applicant. I mean, it's going to be anyone's best guess as to why Joe Schmo lied, why his mother lied, and omitted that information, and or why the landlord would lie. Theories are, lots of different theories out there foisted from as far as the conversation with the landlord. Could be the case that, he was a terrible tenant and he just wants to get rid of this guy. So he wants to give like a decent review referenced of this guy so that he can get this guy out of his property and into somebody else's life, right? So, but either way, he got cut. He's no longer eligible to be that. So that's just like a little ninja trick, so to speak, to make sure that all of the addresses and information match. The second story that I have has to do with an employment check. So there was a gentleman. So I live in California. A lot of my rentals, or most of my rentals, are in Indiana. And there was another gentleman who had applied who was also moving from California to Indiana. He's like, hey, I make 6 figures a year. I can pay an entire year's rent up front. We want to move in as soon as possible. I mean, I was a little uncomfortable with him moving into the house without actually seeing the house first, but he had some friends and family in town who did like the Zillow tour, or like they did a video call with him. So he toured it electronically. They were able to do that. That was no big deal. But I go to do the employment verification, and pro tip, you want to look up the name and telephone number and address of the company online and through other resources, and not just use the number that the applicant provides to you, because anybody can pretend to be somebody's boss, somebody's landlord, right? So anyway, spoke to his boss. He was like, oh yeah, but by the way, Bob Smith, for my second example, Bob Smith hasn't worked here. He quit like 2 months ago, so he doesn't work here anymore. So he just, Bob must have forgotten to put his end date of employment as not being actively employed. So whether or not he had an entire year's of rent to put down or not, the fact that he lied about being actively employed makes him disqualified, right? So that's another way again. So, I mean, moral of the story with this one is just make sure that you're doing the due diligence in actually calling the employers for reference, double check the dates of employment, and also go online to verify that the telephone number provided is actually to the company that he says he works for, right? Third story is of a person who actually listed her friend as a reference, as who posed to be the landlord. So what happened was she was applying for a property, she was self-employed, so we did a different set of verifications there, but she was living in a place, she was renting, and so she provided the landlord reference number, called the landlord reference, called the telephone number that she'd listed as the landlord reference, and I asked, and I was fairly new at the time, so I just asked the basic questions. Can you verify that Sally Smith lived here? What were the dates? What was the rent that she paid? Did she ever pay late? Did you ever have any problems with her? And he was like, yeah, everything's fine. Or he didn't say it like that, but he basically told me, yeah, everything's good. She was the perfect tenant, never paid late, like never had any problems with her. She keeps the house super clean, etc. But then it just felt kind of weird to me, like my spidey senses were tingling a little bit. So I decided to call back a couple of hours later, and I approached it from a different angle. I also called from a different telephone number, and I said, hey, I was calling, I was calling about Sally Smith. How do you know her? And so now, this guy who was previously her landlord, who was posing as her landlord, was like, oh yeah, that's my boy's girlfriend. They've been together for 2 years or whatever it was. And so it's like, okay, thank you. So clearly not the landlord, it's her boyfriend's friend who she asked to pretend to be her landlord. She was also disqualified as a result of that. So, I mean, moral of the story, trust but verify, double check everything, ask the question in such a way that it doesn't make it so easy for people to lie if they are going to be lying about it. And the other thing is, just make sure that you have those criteria that, you're checking things like the credit and the landlord references and, just different things like that. So hopefully that's helpful. And if you do decide to enter the world of real estate and rentals and being a landlord and all of that good stuff, that you just, know that there are ways of vetting out people, and there's no perfect system to know, and there's no crystal ball that I know that this person's going to be a perfect tenant or this person is going to trash my house after they leave, or anything like that. But I feel that these steps that I'm going through helps to sift out the people who have a history or are showing me signs that they're not going to be honest or upfront, or pause or pose some other problems in some other way. So anyway, hopefully you found this helpful. Have a great one.